Hello, everybody, and you're very welcome to this week's episode of Social Talent's The Shortlist. Today, we are talking about employee retention tactics to reduce, quote, talent waste. As we know, the world of hybrid and remote work and interviews has revealed pretty major flaws in the standard employee retention handbook, because most organizations, they fall into either the trap of treating the symptoms of high levels of churn and being reactive rather than focusing on fixing the root cause of turnover. And then that causes a dangerous cycle of investing time and resources in hiring, onboarding, training, only for that employee to leave again after the first year. I want to know, are you stuck inside that cycle? Joining us on the shortlist this week is none other than Lee McQueen, who calls this cycle of talent waste. Lee is an entrepreneur and the founder and CEO of Phoenix51. He's also a previous winner of BBC's The Apprentice, and he's the host of the Talent Waste Show. So joining me on this podcast in the next couple of seconds, together we're going to discuss what talent waste is, how to mitigate this with proactive retention strategies, and how aligning candidates with the culture and the values of a company can make the biggest difference in hiring and retention. So Lee, you are very, very welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Hello, Holly. Thanks for having me, and thank you to all the viewers and listeners as well. I appreciate you having me on today.
Lee, can you give the folks listening or / watching here, those who are watching live, a quick background as to who you are? I'm sure I butchered most of your CV here or skirted past some key moments.
Not at all. Let's not worry about the CV. That's irrelevant. But so for me, I've got, show my age now, 22 years of recruitment experience. I've been in the recruitment industry for that long period of time. I worked for one of the big business process outsourcing companies, Capita, for about 8 years. I ended up being the managing director of their IT recruitment division. Turned over £32 million at the time when I was operating there. And one day, one of my team put an application form across my desk. I looked at it and thought, "What's this?" And it was an application form for the Apprentice. And I thought, "Why not?" So I filled out the application form. A few phone calls and a few interviews later, I ended up beating 20,000 candidates to get onto the show at the time. And 12 weeks later, I ended up winning it. So I won the Apprentice back in 2008. Which was an amazing experience. Worked for Lord Sugar and his son Simon for 2.5 years. We built a digital media business called Screen from the ground up, which was an amazing experience for me. But one of my key drivers was to start my own company, Holly. I always wanted to run my own business, and although I'm a bit of a latecomer to being that entrepreneurial spirit, if you like, 11 years ago I left and I set up Raw Talent. Raw Talent was my second business that I set up. It was a recruitment business focused specifically on early careers. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to bring a bit more diversity into the sales aspect. So the major players at the time were graduate focused recruitment businesses. So anybody that was looking for early talent was grad. So I said, no, let's open the talent pool and look for grads and non-grads, and let's hire based on behaviours and competencies and rip up the CV. And that journey's been a fantastic one, and it really lent us to 2 years ago during a global pandemic, stupidly or brilliantly, we decided to set up Phoenix51, which is a technology platform that digitalises and virtualises people assessment. And that came out of the work that we've done globally with my recruitment business. So that's where we are today. So it's been quite a whirlwind journey, to be fair, Holly.
It sounds like it, actually. I think starting a business with Lord Sugar can be, shall we say, intimidating. Do you mind me asking, is it really 12 weeks? Like it literally is week on week, or is it like more like 5 weeks?
It's 7 actually, or 6 to be completely exact. It was six weeks and 4 days. So the process is actually quite condensed, which if you think about it makes it even harder. One of the hardest things I've done in my career is go on The Apprentice and win The Apprentice. There's no doubt about it. The Apprentice alumni or the winners of The Apprentice will probably come on and say the same thing if you had them onto the shortlist, for example, because you're giving up everything. You're giving up your job. You're giving up a career. You're going into the unknown, and then you are under pressure from the minute you walk through the house, if you like, for the minute you walk into the boardroom. And that was tough. It was a tough scenario, but I've always been the sort of person that kind of wants to challenge myself. I work hard, so that's one of my core kind of inner beliefs is you have to work hard. So I had a strong work ethic, but I didn't know if I was good enough to to beat other people, to pit my wits against other people. So that's why I've done it. I wanted to go and learn from the best, you know. Sir Alan, or Lord Sugar as he's now known, of course, is probably arguably one of the best entrepreneurs the UK's seen for certainly over the last 50 years. So, you know, why not go and learn from the man that's been there and done it? And that was my journey, really.
Yeah. And did you feel that it was an effective way of assessing your and everybody else, all the other participants' skills and abilities in order to get that job?
100%. That kind of... Yeah, 100%. And I think that if you think about what my idea for Raw Talent a couple of years after I won, when I set my own business up, was to not reinvent observational assessment, because that's been around for years, but actually the gold standard of assessment is to do a competency-based interview, to do a role play, to do a presentation, to do some sort of group activity or group task. And actually, if you think about The Apprentice, that's what it is. It's watching and observing every single week. Has these individuals got the right behaviours and competencies that I want in my organisation, in Lord Sugar's case? And I took that idea and said, well, hang on, why can't we give that to our clients? Can't we build a service that would start to drive sales academies for organisations that were looking and watching and seeing, has Holly got the right behaviours? Has Lee got the right behaviours? Has John got the right behaviours? Mm-hmm. And if we see them, if we can test them, then we hire them, and it gives us that better retention rate. And that's what we found over the last 11 years. We've got some amazing data points that we now have, obviously, in our platform around what works well, what doesn't work well in certain sectors and certain industries.
So that's fascinating. Actually, it's lovely that that's such an experience, such a pivotal moment in your early career, shall we say? Because I know you're 22 years in recruitment there at this stage, which is still a young man. But you know, that very pivotal moment, having such a monumental impact on your entrepreneurial journey, and then on the potential assessment and opportunities that now talent more broadly is able to get. So that's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. And I think with that as well is that, so I didn't go to university. So my background is, I grew up in a council house. My dad's a milkman, 42 years. Mum's a receptionist. Wow. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But the reason why it's relevant is because they're workers, right? They're grafters. So that's where I get the work ethic from. But I didn't have, I didn't create the opportunities during my education to be able to go on to do A-levels and to do university. It's totally on me. It's no one's fault. I didn't have a bad thing. It was just, I was the class jester at school. I didn't get on with school. And there'd be people out there watching, or parents that are watching with their children and so on and so forth, that have the similar situation. And back then, apprenticeships, for example, weren't as sexy as they are today. I mean, apprenticeship now, you can do most things. It's brilliant. You can do apprenticeship in dev. You can do apprenticeship in marketing. Back then, you couldn't. It was more, it was more kind of, carpentry or
trade,
electrician, trade, that sort of stuff. Which again, there's nothing wrong with. It's just I wasn't interested in that type of thing. So, for me at that point, if you didn't go to university, you'd already failed. So I was walking out of school going, oh, right, okay, so I'm on the back foot already. And I just think that, if you fast forward like 20 years, that's now completely changed. And now there is different alternatives to university. Not that university is bad. I'm not saying that at all either. Don't get me wrong. But it's opening up opportunities for people that learn differently or are different in other ways that still can showcase their behaviours or their competence to do a role for your organisation. And that's what Phoenix, for example, is all about.
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the most pivotal shifts in British policy, because it's not universal across other countries, particularly across Europe. There's only some small pockets within Europe, especially within the United States, where it's basically university or nothing for professional careers. But being able to, like, incentivizing apprenticeship programs for professional type of careers, like you say, you can do an apprenticeship in marketing, you can do an apprenticeship in accountancy, rather than having to go to college and do a 4-year degree and then go on to do graduate studies in order to get those things. Like, it's really, the avenues to get to professional careers now have broadened so much. So talk to me about talent waste in particular, because I think this is really interesting. Definitely as you've referred to, ripping up that CV, the traditional avenues like going in from university are no longer the only way there. So what is talent waste? Why are you so passionate about this?
Well, I think talent waste is another pandemic, if I'm honest, but people just don't realise it is there. Talent waste exists in businesses globally. The premise really of talent waste is that if you're hiring a bunch of people, one person or 5,000 people, doesn't really matter the number. If you're hiring people but you fail to retain them, you're wasting talent. You've done all that hard work on, I've identified Holly, we've interviewed Holly, we've put Holly through an assessment, we've onboarded Holly, we've given all of the things and brought you into us and you've had a fantastic experience and all of that, and then 7 months later, Holly leaves. That's really expensive. It's expensive for Holly. It's expensive in terms of didn't work out, you've got to go and do your job search again. It's expensive for your team internally because they're like, okay, there's another one's gone, there's another one's come, there's another one's gone. So it doesn't really breed the right values or culture. And it's definitely expensive from a monetary perspective for the business that's hiring because it costs between £12,000 and £30,000 for every bad hire. So CIPD will stated it's around £12,000 to £30,000 per bad hire, and Harvard Business Review states that there's 80% of the issues that we face in our businesses are around bad hires, right? So when you look at them two stats together, you're thinking, wow, there's some big numbers here when you put it into a number. Let's just quantify that a little bit. So say for example, let's take the minimum value there, £12,000 to hire. So I'm not talking about recruitment agency fees. I'm talking about time, resource, onboarding, technology, staff, training, all of that entire process. So that's 12,000. If you're hiring 100 people this year and you're only going to retain 50% of them or 60% of them, that is a huge amount of money, 360 grand, for example, that is literally walking off your bottom line if you can't retain them people. So there's businesses that we've been involved in, some of our clients before they were clients, of course, people that we speak to during the podcast as well, that are sitting in board meetings saying, how can we generate more revenue? How can we get more on our bottom line for our shareholders, yet they are wasting talent every year. 100 hires, only retaining 60 of them in year one, 40% of them are leaving, £360,000 of cost that they don't see because it's not a cost that's visible. Does that make sense, Holly? So there's so much that comes around with that talent waste piece, and if we could fix it, if we could say, let's improve our retention rates from 60% to 70% to 70% to 80%, not only does that have an effect on our monetary, like the crude way of looking at it, we've saved money, but the other thing that it's doing is it's creating pathways for individuals within the business. So therefore, Holly doesn't leave, so therefore Lee's happier as Holly's teammate, and now we can start to see a team bonding and a culture growing within our organisation, and that for me is the key point.
Oh, definitely. I think I probably have 100 questions now for you off the back of that, but certainly there's so many more positive wins to retention than just simply, as you say, the saving of having to do recruitment costs all over again, but also especially in one of the organizations that you founded with regards to raw talent for sales organizations, when your account manager is constantly changing because they're churning out, your customer is less likely to actually stay with you as a client. So
Great point.
Yeah, exactly right. All of your retention, both from your customers and your employees, is really important. Do you think though that retention, particularly after that kind of the first 6-month honeymoon period of your new job, or even the first 2 years of your new job, like we kind of think like 2 years, oh yeah, that's a chore duty, that's okay. We were allowed to go off and leave. Well, they certainly are allowed to go off and leave. We do want them to stay, but what are the things that is leading to retention problems? Is it that assessment piece? Is it the interview failed? Is it the onboarding thing that failed? Did we not do right by them at some point during the transition to career mobility? Like what's the factors for churn?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. I think that there's, if we dissect it a little bit, it's probably all of the above or aspects of all of the above. So, I've got a philosophy that when a disaster happens or something happens that you don't want, it's not just one thing that causes it, is an amalgamation of a few things. And it might only be that that 1% of the problem is is the interviewing process, but 10% of the problem is the assessment process. So it's an amalgamation of all them things. If we break that down, where it really starts for us, or for me, is your core values. So as a business, if you've got say 4 core values, and you're hiring against them core values, regardless of the job role, regardless of the people that you're bringing into your organisation, they should all share the same core values, because then you're giving yourself the best possible chance for people to stay culturally in your business. Most people, when you do an exit interview with people, most people don't say, I'm leaving because I don't get paid enough. Most people don't say that. They do leave because of them reasons, but most people don't. Most people leave because of their leader, or because of their boss, or because of ultimately their team around them. And what we're talking about here, you can talk about it saying it's a bit woolly, it's a bit fluffy. You can talk about that, but it's the culture. We're talking about the culture of the business, and so these are our core values, and you might stick them up on the wall, and they're great, but do we live and breathe by our core values? Because if we do, that means that we're hiring people into the business. I'll give you an example. Oh, I've gone dark. 1 second. Live. I've gone dark. There you go. Brilliant. Fantastic.
If you sit still for too long, this.
I know. I need to start waving my hands. I'll give you an example. So when we started to build out raw talent's core cultural value, or core why, if you like, was that we don't hire based on CV. It's wrong. We hire based on behaviours and competencies, and that was our metaphor and our mantra. And ultimately, we've taken that into the Phoenix51 business. But why that's relevant is, if somebody who was absolutely brilliant, really, really good, great standard on LinkedIn, great standard in the industry, come for an interview at Raw Talent, but they firmly believed that we should be hiring on a CV, we wouldn't hire them, because they go completely against our core value. Now, so your face is quite surprised there in a sense, but that's the bit that people, it won't make much difference. We can change Holly. You can't. If it's a core belief, Holly won't change, or Lee won't change, and that's why it starts at your core values. So once you've got your core values set, you can get a real strong set of competencies out of what them core values are. So in other words, if one of your core values is team, and to be team centric, then communication might be one of your core competencies that goes with that value. And therefore, one of your core competencies running through all of your hires, regardless of your business, should be communication. And then, of course, from that competency, you've then got a set of behaviours. So how do we then measure whether or not Lee or Holly is good in communication? And that's where the interviewing, the assessment comes in, where you're really starting to test and show and see and observe, have we got them core behaviours that essentially roll up to competency, that essentially roll up to values? Does that make sense? So yeah, that's the bit that really starts. And then once you've found that, and a lot of people, Holly, organisations, sorry, I should say, they're scared, probably seems too long, big a word, but they're a bit apprehensive, because it means that you're screening people in and not screening people out. And most organisations, from a recruitment perspective, screen people out. Right, let's have a look at their CV. Have they got a degree? No. Let's screen them out. Okay, let's have a look at their CV. Have they got 5 years experience? No. Let's screen them out. But what we're doing is saying, okay, let's not worry about your degree, or let's not worry about your experience per se. Let's worry about, has Holly got the core competencies that fit into our values? Yes, she has. Right, now let's have a conversation about, has she got the skill set? Do you see what I mean? So there's a fundamental difference between screening in and screening out. And for some businesses, that is impossible. For some businesses, that doesn't work. When you're hiring for tens of thousands of people, that maybe over the Christmas period in retail, you just need people to come in and temp for that Christmas period, and for that demand. Maybe you don't need to go into this detail, but from a permanent perspective, when you're looking to grow people within your company over a long period of time, that's when this method works really, really well.
Yeah, I would argue to say, even for temp positions, like for a 13-week Christmas peak period, for example, or over the summer period, if you're doing summer jobs or any of those kinds of things, like those individuals will still have an impact on the customer, especially if they're customer facing, right? So your values have to be lived through, right? They're definitely not something that let's lower our bar in order to get people in the door, but ultimately making sure that we're still aligned the whole way. I think that piece around employee and company culture, there is a propensity, I think, for organizations obviously to match past behaviors, as in past experience, and like, tell me about a time you did XYZ, versus learning agility and that kind of core competency of learning agility and being able to demonstrate potential. How do you how does any organization, particularly something like Phoenix51, which is trying to digitize this service for organizations to do this at scale, really look at the potential of an employee where they may not have had the best training, they may not have been terribly well prepared, they may not have had access to this particular skill building, or even the mindset to understand that the CV is no longer relevant. And they just have never been exposed to an argument as to what could be the alternative, right? How do you educate somebody on, or how do you decipher the potential of an employee at an early talent or even kind of mid-experience kind of level as well, in order to see whether or not they're going to be right for our culture?
Yeah, I mean, again, even that mid side, even that senior side of things as well. It is relevant across them key areas. It's interesting actually, because my business partner, my co-founder of Phoenix51, is Chris Wimshurst. He's a business psychologist, and that's important because he brings the science wrapped behind how we do certain things and how we score. The gold standard of or the platinum, if you like, the top step of that assessment piece is around competency-based interviewing. So competency-based questions, we haven't reinvented them, they've been around for a long time, but actually scoring them against them key competencies and values, and then having a data set to be able to say, actually, this is Holly, and this is what Holly scored against them key competency behaviours, this is Lee, and this is what Lee scored. A lot of businesses, Holly, you might be surprised at this or not, I don't know, the watching and audience and the listeners, but so many people still use a pen and paper. They still write things down. They still interview. Even on Teams today, there'll be people around the world that have gone onto Teams. Hi, Holly, how you getting on? Let's do a 40-minute interview. Throw some questions at each other. Write some stuff down. Yeah, I think that's quite good. Yeah, that's. And I'm not being derogatory. I'm just saying that is what some people are doing. So to put a structure around that and digitalise that structure, we don't use AI. We're not asking the computer to say yes or the computer to say no. This is still human interaction, but it's human interaction through an automated platform that enables you to see data analysis on strengths, on weaknesses, where they need to, where they could improve on certain areas, which gives you the toolkit, for want of a better expression, to be able to develop that individual. Like you mentioned before, Holly, if you've got a mid person coming in, somebody who's got a few years experience, and they're in their kind of, I don't know, third or fourth role, it might be, they still need to be able to develop. They still need to be able to learn. So how are we deciding where their areas of development are? Using a tool such as ours, but there's other tools out there, of course, but using a tool such as ours enables you to have a better data-driven decision. But ultimately, it's still your decision as a human. You still make the decision in the end to say, do you know what? I can see Holly's data set, and I can see that she's scoring brilliantly here, and here. In a commercial awareness is maybe a little bit low, but that's okay. I know that. Now I'm going to train and develop her, but I'm still going to hire Holly into the organisation. Just think about what that breeds as a culture. All of a sudden now you've created a career pathway for Holly. Holly now knows that the learning development before she gets into post is that commercial aspect. So you'll probably when you do come on board and you start your onboarding period with us as a new organisation, you've probably done a load of work in the back end to work on your commerciality. So there's so many positives that comes with that. And what we found over time, especially in the early careers piece as well, is over time people want knowledge. That's what retains people in the organisation. They it's not necessarily just a monetary piece. Even in sales, 20 years ago, if you said to a salesperson, what's the most important thing to you? They'd say money, and everyone would be like, yeah, it's all about the money. It's not about that anymore. It's about development. It's about how do I get better? How do I learn? I want to be around good people. And if you integrate me into a team and half the team in 6 months leaves, what do you think I'm going to do? And that's the bit it's the byproduct of that. I don't want to say bums on seat, but it's a byproduct of hiring that individual into the business and then losing them so quickly because of them key things that we've talked about aren't happening.
Yeah, I think I would argue that there are still a lot of salespeople out there who definitely want the money and who are hired because they want the money. If you want it, you will go after it, you know. But on that bit around the data piece, right? Because that's definitely an area where we see an awful lot of in our sort of unconscious bias / very conscious bias. You know, when you make a pros and cons list about anything, like a decision on who you're going to, you know, you're deciding between whether or not to go out with this person more long term, you know, after a couple of dates or whatever else, you're making that pros and cons list. Ultimately, if after writing out all your pros and cons, the cons start outweighing the pros, but ultimately your heart, your gut feel is like, oh, but I do actually really like this person. You'll start kind of saying, actually, that con isn't really that important, and this one isn't really. You will actively start justifying your decision. So how do you prevent that when the data is fairly obvious and fairly clear and pointing you towards, we think this person will be a good employee for the business based on their assessment. We think this person probably wouldn't be a good employee for the business based on their assessment. But ultimately, that system one kind of gut feel, you know, they had a great interview, they made me laugh, you know, we got on great. Like those are really powerful emotions that people feel, and they can and do override the system. How do you prevent that, or is it possible even to prevent it?
It's a really good question, Holly. I think gut feel is important in the world, for people in the world of business as well. I do think it's important. I think that we've come a long way, probably in the last 5 years, maybe 10 years, around that cancel culture and cancelling certain things out and making sure that everything has to be. And actually, the old way never worked at all, and that old way was gut feel. I'm somewhere in between. I think that science should be there to help make the decisions, but ultimately that's why the computer is not saying yes or no, because it is ultimately the human decision. All we can do as a platform is show you, hold the mirror up really, I suppose, and show to you these are the key areas that are needed for development. These are the reds, these are the ambers, these are the red flags. If you still want to hire that person, Holly, because your gut is saying, actually, I think Lee's going to be good. I probably wouldn't be, by the way. But if that's the case, then that's up to you. But don't be foolish. Don't be foolish to not use the data to train and develop in the areas that the platform is showcasing you, or the process is showcasing you. So in other words, you're looking for an 80% or 85% percentile, of entire scores. If you've got 8 or 9 different key competencies, you want to see 80% of that individual hitting 80% of them, that's deemed good enough, or that's what good looks like in your business, and therefore you're hiring that individual. They're still not 100%, right? Because no one's perfect. So you could assess to the cows come home, and you'll never get somebody that's going to score 100% every single time. And that's right, because there's no one that's perfect. There's always room for that learning. So to eradicate some of that kind of that gut feel versus that data piece, or to bring them two together, set benchmarks of, like, we know in our business that this percentile is what good looks like. We know that because we've got data on hiring these people in the past, or these people with these behaviours in the past typically do this. So then we can start to assess the potential of them hires coming in, and that's how you would start to kind of eradicate that. I mean, the ability to be able, for you and I to be interviewing at the same time. Say you're my boss, and you and I are interviewing, and I don't know, Andrew, and I'm looking over. What are you saying, Holly? I'm being influenced by you. Or you might make a comment and I'm being influenced by you because you're my boss. I'm thinking, all right, I better score higher. Or, that needs to be gated. That needs to be stopped. It needs to be me scoring that individual, assessing or interviewing that individual yes, at the same time as you, but in a gated process. And that's quite important, because that unconscious bias starts to creep in them aspects as well, to actually say, all right, by running a data driven decision, we can start to see if there's any trends in the data. Lee always hires the same sort of people, or Holly always hires the same sort of people. Is there a pattern there? Is there a trend there? It's quite powerful stuff from an overall business point of view, as well. So that's kind of some of the key things that a data driven approach would start to eliminate.
Yeah, it definitely showcases accountability, right? So if, for example, you always agree with the hiring decisions that I make, that's a big red flag from that HR may be able to point out and go, look, we believe you're actually you are leading the witness, so to speak, and it's
Yeah.
you're not doing a great job in terms of being objective.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly that sort of thing. So.
Yeah. Talk to me about internal mobility, because we've obviously spoken about the filling of the bucket, and now we want to stop that bucket from leaking at the bottom. But one of the big reasons that employees leave, aside from poor onboarding experience and poor value match, is they're in the business 2 years. They do align with the organization's values clearly, because we've assessed them well and they've done well. But now it's time for the next step, and it's not going to be here for a range of reasons. And those reasons are usually down the lines of there are no opportunities that I can see. They're not obvious to me. I don't know how to apply to an internal position. They're never advertised. I never see them until I look on, Indeed or other job portals. They're not advertised internally, for example. My boss might prevent me from going, right? They're hoarding me. They're saying, "Oh, you're too good for our team. What if you leave my team, we won't be able to do anything we want?" And that's then gone, right? Or they are being passed over for promotion because of not from merit, shall we say. Merit is not how people get their job. They get their next job through their network and having others advocate for their merit, which may or may not be true. So how can this system be used, these similar tools and everything else be used for an internal mobility perspective, rather than just the acquisition of people into the business?
Yeah, again, thank you. Brilliant question. Yeah, absolutely, of course. And I think what our specific platform doesn't do is it doesn't flag up to a hiring manager in the US that there's an individual called Holly in Ireland that's perfect for that job. It doesn't do that. But what it does do is opportunity, the management community, an opportunity to assess their current staff, and that's really important, because yes, so you're a candidate and we've assessed you, and now you've come into the business. But how do we then develop your career path during your employment with our business? And actually, if I'm your line manager, why don't we then use our assessment tool to assess months or your ongoing career? I'll give you a couple of examples. One of our clients is actually using, it is in a sales environment actually, but one of our clients is using our platform to assess sales individuals in real time. So they're going out on sales meetings or live sales calls, and they're assessing their key behaviours and competencies against what that job needs to do, and feedback in real time. So what's happening is when they're coming back to do that again or again next week, week after, month after, whatever, the continuous improvement much develop your career path or business. And one of our other businesses actually took a broader view. One of our other clients saw a broader view. They had 150 managers that were in their business that were all at different levels. So they were probably mid managers, maybe 70 to 100k. Kind of that sort of area, and what we did is we used the platform to actually drive some assessment around where they're actually at within their career. What would they need to do in order to get up to the next level, which was account director, I think, at the time, and how far away they were from that. And what that essentially meant, when Holly had been there for 6 months, who was performing Lee, who he is, when Holly got promoted, Lee wasn't worried because I knew where I needed. I wasn't getting that promotion, and these are the key reasons why. Similarly, if you reverse that, the trouble with not knowing what that benchmark is that Holly's the better individual. Lee gets promoted because he's been there longer than Holly. Holly then says, well, there's no point me staying here, right? I may as well leave. Lee's now in the wrong job, so he ends up leaving after 6-7 months. And then Holly's team can see all this happening and say, well, actually, if this is the way the company works, then I'm going to leave. So all of a sudden, just by making that wrong decision, whether it's a hiring decision or a promotional decision, we've created a massive issue in the business. And that's where organisations, and not all organisations, of course, but a lot of organisations are not seeing that problem.
I can see that as being a hugely valuable piece of insight, though, whether it's in me as a learning professional or me as an individual, right? Because trying to be able to validate the training initiatives that we deliver to our employees, for example. So like obviously in every single organization, there are training initiatives, whether they are formal or informal, right? Whether it's like you're sitting beside me and we're learning through like some tacit information sharing. We're both on the same sales meetings, and therefore you're kind of learning from me, for example. Or I'm going through a formal training course, whether that's on something like social talent or if it's something, where you're actually going off to a college or something on those lines. Those kind of formal interventions. There's very, very little, there's very few evidence-based kind of like on the job sort of validations of how that intervention has actually proven out, how it has come out in the wash. Because of course every individual will take that training and do their own thing with it. They're going to put their own spin on things. It starts to spin off a whole load of other innovations in their own mind for some individuals, of course, particularly the more creative ones or certainly the most experienced. Whereas others are just going to take it root and branch, go, yep, that's great. I'm going to do the things precisely what I was taught in my training course and do nothing else. And so from a validation of training, that sounds amazing. But then it's the data for my own performance, right? So like I have a smartwatch and I've used a smartwatch for years, and I rely on that to tell me how many steps I've done today, the fact that I haven't stood up in the last 37 minutes, and I need to stand up now for a minute at some point during this hour. All of those data points which says if you do these things you will be healthier. But without somebody monitoring that performance at a reasonably unintrusive level, right, I don't know where to make good choices or good alternative choices to what my instinct would tell me.
Completely, and again, it goes back to my crazy point right at the beginning, which is I find it completely crazy why people are still using a piece of paper and a pen to make handwritten notes and make judgments on the most important asset that you in your business today, which is your people. We have all these devices. I have the same Apple Whoop. Anybody got a Whoop strap that talks about your health, and it makes all these things that we have in our lives. Most of the clients that we're working with, most of the people that are watching this, and they have data points all over their lives on their phone. They have key data points: stand up, sit down, too loud, too quiet, all these things. Yet when we go into hiring process, where's that CV that was invented? Yeah, can I have a quick squiz at that? Oh no, you're not good enough. Really? What, based on a 2-page CV because you've got a couple of paragraphs? Doesn't make sense, does it, Holly? To be honest, it doesn't make sense. So actually to put the points around our platform, and there's other platforms out there. Of course, there's other interviewing platforms that are different to what we do, and so on and so forth. But in the recruitment technology space, of course, there is. A lot of them aren't wearables. You can't wear them and say, "Oh, person's behaving in this way," an Apple Watch, whatever. But we can still get some really strong data points at what you're observing. Coming back to your dating point you mentioned earlier, that made me smile. Yeah.
Oh goodness, I think we have lost Lee, unfortunately. I really hope that Lee is able to rejoin us. We were losing him based on, I think it was internet connection. I'm so sorry, everyone. Hopefully we'll be able to get Lee back. If we don't, before in the next 2 minutes, because we thankfully are also towards the end of our show, let me tell you about details for our episode next week. So next week, Wednesday, the 23rd of November, which would be 4 p.m. Irish time, or 11 a.m. New York time, that is GMT versus EST, we'll be joined by Dimitri Julius, who's the head of special projects, and he was previously the chief people officer at Icon. And what Johnny Campbell will be talking to Dimitri about would be how to identify a bad workplace culture before it's too late, which kind of stems on very, very nicely from what Lee was saying about us trying to prove and manage out, or manage in rather, people based on their cultural alignment to our company values. But ultimately, I think it'll all go from there. Ultimately, the screening in versus screening out piece is going to be key, both for talent and for those employers as well. Lee, are you back? I hope you can. Can you hear us? Hello, Lee, can you hear us? Oh, Lee, I'm so sorry. The line is really, really, really tough to hear. I'm really sorry. I will have to call time there, as our time is up. But secondly, I'm really sorry we couldn't get Lee's last piece of advice. What I'll ask Lee to do is to share that last piece of advice. We'll put it either into the show notes if you're listening back on this in the podcast, or into the chat in the live LinkedIn and YouTube broadcast for this podcast as well. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for this really riveting conversation with Lee McQueen. I've learned a ton, by the way. I hope you all have too. And we will see you next week for that talk with Dimitri Julius, talking about how to identify a bad workplace culture before it's too late. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye.